Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and we're very timely today. We're starting 2 minutes early, and I can assure you that is not something that always happens in Brussels. So thank you all very much, and welcome to the MOBI-TWIN final conference today here, which is entitled Mobility, Regional Attractiveness and Cohesion for Europe's twin transition. I want to say also a very warm welcome to those of you joining us online from across Europe, perhaps even around the world, and we are delighted that you're joining us too as well. We're going to focus on a central question today. How are the green and digital transitions reshaping where people live and work and move, and what does that really mean for Europe's regions? And the event builds on the work of the MOBI-TWIN project, which has explored how mobility interacts with regional attractiveness, labour markets and territorial cohesion. So a lot of different moving parts, and we're going to try and bring them together today. We'll move from evidence to interpretation to policy intelligence, so looking at what's happening but also what can happen and what should happen and what that means for decision making at the EU national and regional level. I'm Jennifer Baker. I am a policy journalist based here in Brussels and also a professional moderator. So I'll be guiding you through our very packed agenda. Let's have a look at what we've got coming up here on the agenda. As you can see, we'll have some welcoming, some opening remarks and a keynote. We will then move on into scientific presentations, and then we will also have panel discussions. And during those discussions, of course, we will have the opportunity for you to ask questions here in the room. Apologies to those online. We suggest you reach out bilaterally if you have questions. There's mics in front of everyone here today, so if you want to ask questions, please catch my eye, raise your hand, and do wait for me to come to you, because we can only have one microphone at a time working. And if we're not on mic, then those who are joining online can't hear us. But you can ignore the headset because we're not using simultaneous translation today. We don't have human cameramen or camera women today. They're automated. We have robot camera persons, so they will be automatically directed to whichever mic is switched on. So if you do not want to be filmed or recorded or transmitted, please do not switch on your mic and reach out to the speakers bilaterally during the coffee break sessions. There will indeed be coffee outside during our coffee break session. The toilets are also out there to your left. If you can't find the sign, they're around the corner on the left, and the emergency exits are also signposted. If you've any queries about what's happening and where you are, the MOBI-TWIN team has the stickers, the round ones on. I think Giulia has one there. So you can find them, and they will be able to help you to navigate your way around. So just once again, do remember the event is live streamed and recorded, and the recordings will be uploaded on the MOBI-TWIN project website, and it's on the YouTube channel. So I think that's enough from me. We're here to really talk about the content. And so to set the scene, introduce the agenda, we have 3 opening speakers. And the big question really is at the heart of the conference: how is Europe's twin transition reshaping where people live, work and move? So I'm going to hand over the floor to our gracious host today, Director of Legislative Works from the European Committee of the Regions, Thomas Wobben.
Yes. Thank you, Jennifer, and welcome here in the House of the Regions, in the European Committee of the Regions. We are delighted to host you here. This is also one of our key functions, to be a platform for an exchange, and I see this as a very important topic also for exchange with the local regional level. The topic of the project is really timely, to look at the special mobility and the impact on regions, to link it with the twin transition, and then, of course, also with the changing mobility patterns. These are burning questions, and behind it is, of course, the question of the impact on regional attractiveness, and I'm very pleased that you have colleagues from OECD here who have been working on this for some time. And, of course, it is linked to smart specialization, how regions can translate this into action. I'm also very happy because your partnership of the project is very diverse, which means that it really reflects the challenges of this twin transition for different types of regions, regions which are growing, regions which are shrinking, regions which are rural, regions which are urban. And of course, this is the reality we live in. There is not a one-size-fits-all solution to it, and it's also not a solution where we have everybody winning, to be very clear. And this is also important for the Committee of the Regions, because the twin transition, even though it is inevitable, we have to reach climate neutrality and others, the implications on regions are very different. They can be positive, they can build up new competitive advantages, or they can be negative. When, for example, transition means massive job cuts, and also where regions have to rethink their own success in the future, the past dependency of their development model. There is also an issue here at the European level, because the more and more we have also the feeling that the question, do regions matter, is being asked more and more. We have the feeling that some parts in policy making do not see regions as the regions that matter, simply because they see the development of regions as a natural process where which you can't influence, or because they don't have an answer, or they see regional policy as a sectorial policy as other policies. So the role of regions in EU policy making is at the moment at stake. And that's why, for example, this topic, this conference comes as a very important stage, because we are discussing, for example, in cohesion policy, how it should be implemented in the future. Should it be only centralized? Should it be seen as a budget transfer where everything is possible and no real regional narrative is behind it? And the second question, should it only look at the past? Should it only look at supporting regions which are poor? Or should it also invest in regions who have the biggest transition challenge in front of them? So the question of just transition is a very pertinent one for cohesion policy as well. And we see it a bit disappearing from the political agenda at the moment, not in DG Employment, I have to clearly say, but in other parts of the Commission. So the question, do regions matter? And does just transition matter, is at stake. And of course, we are discussing at the moment when we are looking at the next EU budget. And of course, these questions are very much linked to it. And we would encourage you to really develop this mantra of regional attractiveness as a key element also for a successful transition for a place-based solution. This needs to be linked to industrial policy, it needs to be linked to the transport policy, energy policy, regional development policy. And the key for this is the design of the next national reform and partnership plans of cohesion policy. How much of your knowledge is being integrated in regional chapters, into the national planning, into the cooperation with the civic society and others. So there's often the say that the final conference is the start of a new beginning. I would really encourage you to use this in your debates at in your role as universities, in your role as advisor to policy, to make it happen that these are reflected in the national or regional chapters, and that we have this narrative of just transition as a horizontal challenge for many EU policies being more anchored as it is now. So in this sense, thank you for this project, thank you for this, for coming here, and we are listening very carefully what you have to say, and I would encourage you to spread the news and to engage with your regions to make it happen and to make a successful transition, because only the successful transition with place-based solution will convince the voters, will convince the citizens that we are on the right track. So in this sense, thanks for the invitation and good luck to the conference.
And thank you very much indeed, Thomas. So you've set some good questions for us that I'm sure we will address over the course of today. We'll turn now to DG Employment from the European Commission. You've already had a shout out. Simone Rosini, who works in the Fair, Green and Digital Transitions Unit. So please give us the thoughts that are coming from the Commission.
Thank you very much to both of you. And yeah, the name of the unit is pretty long, but it's indeed everything comes together in a way for us today, because of fair, green and digital transitions and research, and this is basically what we're talking today with a mobility spin, but this is the aspects that have been covered, and they came together with this project. I think like most of what I had in mind, Thomas already covered, and I think it's both a pleasure and a bit difficult for me now. But indeed, I think mainstreaming this regional dimension is very important. These challenges cut across different services. We were talking also before the meeting itself. Several services should be involved. It's not only Ample, it's Regio, it's Grow, it's Move, different parts of the Commission, because these challenges cut across, and this evidence can nurture and foster different dimensions, and dimensions that are cross-sectoral by definition. One can wonder if some restructuring may be needed to adapt a bit the services to the challenges that we're facing now. I think that particularly for Ample, which I try to focus more on in my 3 minutes presentation, it's we are a bit more maybe used to work at regional level and with the ESF, with the European Social Fund, like a bit Regio with the RDF. It's a pleasure to see here today colleagues of mine that are working on regional plans. So it's nice to see that already there is a bit more traction on this sort of events, and I think it's something that can really trickle down pretty easily. Of course, there is always a bit of challenge in getting the attention of that we receive a lot of input from different sides. But one of the points we wanted to achieve, one of the objectives we wanted to achieve with these and other projects was really a bit to broaden our network, to have new sources and a bit of a refreshing of the evidence, reading something, analysis that are coming from different evidence can really help in having in a reality check and try to improve our policies and the distribution on our funds, so that they are up to date and to the challenges that we're facing in this world, which is reshaped basically not constantly. And in the last year, I would say it's evident every day you open a newspaper. In terms of policies, I think that this project will be particularly useful, and I've already been passing a lot of your insights and discoveries to the colleagues working in labor mobility, and some of it for sure will be taken up in this fair labor mobility package, which is the big thing of the labor mobility under this commission. It's planned for September 2026. Then there can be some hiccups always, but this is the plan. And there will be 4 main elements. One is the strengthening of the European Labour Authority through a revision also of the mandate. One is a proposal for a European Social Security Pass. One is the Skills Portability Initiative, and the 4th one is a communication to accompany and frame these initiatives. Because, as I said, we touch different elements, and this evidence will be useful also for other fields, like, the Union of Skills and all these, also in that case, the Skills Portability Initiative, the Union for Skills, the Pact for Skills. These are all elements that can be touched by these digital and green elements, and also like the anti-poverty strategy, because we're talking about some regions that are facing the population and all a number of different challenges that are more often than not a bit compound. No? There is a bit of a lag in the digital transition, for instance, and then for the companies struggle more, and then the people go out and abandon these places. So it's obviously impossible to draw a connection one-to-one between a research project and a policy initiative that will be launched, and it is being launching right now. But you are part of this knowledge ecosystem that aims at having solid analytical underpinning for all our policy initiatives.
Thank you very much indeed, and we will hear more from you a little bit later on. We'll turn now to Giulia Zendron, who is the MOBI-TWIN Coordinator and Senior Project Manager at White Research, who really knows everything that we're going to talk about today. So, Giulia, over to you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today and for your interest in our project. I would also like to briefly thank the Committee of the Regions for hosting us today and Director Thomas Wobben for being with us this morning, and Simone Rosini, who's also the Policy Officer of the MOBI-TWIN project, and of course all our partners and speakers who will be joining the discussions today, and Jennifer, who will be guiding us through the day. So I think we just heard how important the questions of this conference are. So what is MOBI-TWIN all about? To give you some context, as we heard, we feel that we have a sense that something is shifting across Europe's regions. People are making choices about where to live, where to work, where they feel that they can build a future. And these choices are not only economic, they are shaped by many different factors. Opportunities people find, services around them, how easy it is to move around, to stay connected digitally, quality of life, and even whether they feel they belong. And at the same time, we have Europe that is being transformed by these two major transformations, the green and the digital transitions. And these transitions are reshaping how regions evolve, but not everywhere in the same way. So we asked ourselves two questions. How are the green and the digital transitions changing mobility across Europe's regions, and what does this mean for these regions? Why do some places attract people and opportunities while others struggle more? And we heard that this feels particularly relevant right now, where regions are dealing with talent shortages, demographic change, inequalities, or new pressures that are linked with these transitions. And this is really where MOBI-TWIN started, so we wanted to try to better understand these changes and what they mean for regions. So over the past 3 years, we have explored these questions together with 9 partners from across Europe. And together, we have generated new data on what drives mobility. We have developed a regional attractiveness index and typologies of European regions. We have modeled future scenarios to explore how these trends might evolve and what they might mean for regions and for policies. And we have been talking to the people who are dealing with these challenges on the ground in our 5 case regions. And you'll get a taste of all of that today from the presentations of our partners. But the idea is not to go into everything in detail, it's really to take a step back and to ask ourselves, what does all of that mean for policy? How do we make sure that these trends that we're studying and what we are learning about how regions respond can actually be turned into useful evidence for regional decision makers to help regions better navigate these transitions in a way that is both fair and effective. So I won't go into further conclusions now. I just want to invite you all to engage with the discussion and hopefully take something useful for your own work. So thank you again for being here, and I hope you enjoy the day.
Thank you, Giulia, and indeed thank you to Thomas and Simone as well for a really good scene setting. We're going to go on now to our keynote, Mobility in Europe's Twin Transition, Why Mobility Matters for Regional Cohesion now. Because mobility is very often treated as an outcome, but today we're looking to position it as a core mechanism for shaping those regional futures. So Anastasia Panori will unpack all of this and why getting the policy right is increasingly urgent. And Anastasia is the MOBI-TWIN Scientific Coordinator and Assistant Professor on Regional Analysis and Policy at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. So take it away.
Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you first of all of you for being here today, this final event of the project. And of course, thank you very much. I want to thank Thomas, Simone and Giulia for the very nice introduction of setting the scene. So today, I don't want to start with a graph because, okay, I love graphs, but today I would like to start with a train. So every weekday morning at 7:42, there is a train starting from a small town in northern Greece, about an hour from where I live in Thessaloniki. So in this train, the people on it are mostly young, and this train is half full most of the time. And these people go to the city, to Thessaloniki in this case, to work, to study, and to see how their lives could become. And this is the part that matters in our case. You can find the same 742 train, because this is the part that matters, because most of them will not come back in many cases. And you can find the same train in Galicia, Sicily, Eastern Germany, rural France, central Portugal, and many other European regions. And at every station it stops, there is a region that is quietly losing a little more of its future. We have different languages, we have different timetables, but the train is the same. So this is an issue. And this is what we mean at the end when we are talking about spatial mobility. Not lines on a map and not arrows on a report, but what we are talking about is about a woman deciding on a Tuesday morning that she cannot live her life in the place where she grew up, so she has to move. And also about, for example, a 35-year-old software engineer who decides that he can use his Amsterdam salary to go to a small village in Italy and work from there. So these are not data points. These are decisions. These are choices. And when they are added together, they decide which European regions can thrive and which European regions are slowly hollowed out. During the last years, there is an ongoing discussion at the European level about the twin transition, including green and digital. But when we talk about it, we mostly talk about how these green and digital transformations affect economies. But what I would like to propose to you today is to think in a different way. We don't think that the twin transition is not only transforming what we produce and how we produce it, but it is also transforming where we can live our lives. And that is a geographical revolution. It's quieter than the industrial one, it's slower than the digital one, but it's no less consequential. Because for the first time in a generation, what we can see here is that there are two different opposing forces that work at the same time. On the one hand, we have the digital transition that it says location is optional. You can work from home, you can work from a village, a small town, a coastal island, as long as the fiber reaches you, so you can work from anywhere. But at the same time, you can also have the green transition that says location is destiny. So when the wind blows, where the sun falls, when the minerals are, these are places that can become and are unexpectedly becoming the center of the economy again. So when you put these two forces together, you can have the main question, the central question of this project. So when distance stops punishing you and place starts rewarding you, who moves and who is left behind? This is the main question that we tried to answer in MOBI-TWIN. What we thought and what we found at the end. So the old story and what we knew from previous researchers was that, okay, we have arrows. These arrows are pointing one way. So usually we have movements from rural to urban areas, southern to northern Europe, periphery to core. And the policy in most cases assumed that this would stay this way. But during these last 3 years in MOBI-TWIN, what we found is that it's not that simple. So mobility creates like a weather system. It's complex, reversible, and surprising. We found counter-urbanization in places that no one expected. We also saw that digital nomads can reshape small towns. We also saw return migration of skilled Europeans that have been abroad more than a decade, but who decided to go back to their places, even their places could not believe that. We also saw cross-border movements and patterns that have been rewired after the COVID and the Brexit. So what we are seeing now, in short, is that the old category of left behind places and there is a new category of rediscovered places that are start to touch each other on the same map. And this is why, and this is why we will start to need a new vocabulary. And this is why the MOBI-TWIN wanted to develop this regional attractiveness index. We didn't do it in order to rank regions like football teams or something, but we did that because we really wanted to ask a question: what makes place somewhere that a person chooses to stay? So that was the main question. And the results were very surprising, because it's not only jobs as it used to be some years ago, but it's also connectivity, services, green amenities, housing, and trust. So what we have found during MOBI-TWIN is that attractiveness has expanded. But policy has not yet caught up in this expanded approach of attractiveness. So this is the main issue that we wanted to go further. Until now, cohesion policy was built on an assumption, on convergence assumption. So the idea was that you give lagging regions the right investments, the right infrastructure, and the right framework, and they can catch up. So that was the main idea. And for 40 years, this worked. Imperfectly, unevenly, but it worked. But this assumption is now under strain. Not because cohesion policy failed, no, but because the ground underneath it moved. So when productive units were factories, and just factories, but now one of the most important productive units is also talent. And talent can be mobile in a way that factories were not. So convergence is not only about capital flowing in, it's also about people choosing to stay in a place, also people coming back, and people arriving for the first time in town. So so convergence is no longer automatic, which means that if we continue to design policies as if people were geographically fixed, this will be an issue. We will keep funding regions that are quietly emptying out. And for example, we will build excellent broadband in villages where the last family moved away before the project started. And we will also open training centers in places that the people who get trained, they just leave this place after the training ends. And this is not a failure of any program, but it's a design question that we need to consider for the next decade. And in short, mobility is the variable that we forgot to put in the cohesion equation, and it is time to put it in, because it really matters at this point. And now I just want to stay here a little bit more and get more in depth about what's happening at the regional level. When we talk about a region gaining or losing, we tend to talk as a region is a single thing, but like being on a dot on a map, but it is not. Every European region is in truth several geographies at once under one administrative name. So there is the capital and there is the periphery, it is the coast and the interior, it is the valley and the mountain. And it's also the well-connected corridor and the small village 220 kilometers off the motorway. And the twin transition is not arriving in any of these places at the same speed or in the same form. So we're talking about different forms of the ways in which twin transition arrives in different places. And in most every region we have seen, there is a regional center that is gaining. So we have remote workers, green investments, young returnees, and all the attractiveness indicators keep rising. But in the same region, meanwhile, we also have places that are, for example, 40 kilometers away, and they are still losing. So you get more people, young people on the morning train, school roles are shrinking, and the investment cycles keep passing by. So this is why we insist that we have one region and two trajectories, and they are held together by a policy framework that too often does not yet distinguishes between them. And this is why we insist in MOBI-TWIN that the unit of analysis matters. The twin transition does not arrive in a region, but it arrives in a postcode, and the policy should see that. Policy should see at the postcode level. And why now? Why is it relevant now? There are three reasons that the clock is ticking, and all this discussion is very relevant at this point. The first one is that the demographic window is closing. So Europe's working age population is shrinking. And every regional policy we design now competes not only between regions, but also at the global level, between other continents. for a finite pool of mobile talent. So we have to keep in mind we're not competing within Europe, but we're also competing with other continents to attract new talent. The second reason is that the investment cycle is here. So the next multi-annual financial framework is being shaped in rooms like this. And if mobility evidence and all the things that we are talking about do not enter these rooms, then mobility will not be able to shape instruments at all. And finally, a third reason is that political stakes are real. So places that feel that they have no future, they are the ones that where democratic trust erodes fastest. So regional attractiveness in the medium term could be thought as a condition of European stability. So all these three clocks are running together. We have the demographic, we have the fiscal and the democratic clock, and we need to consider them at the same time. So going back to where we started, where we began, the goal of MOBI-TWIN was not to empty that train. People have been moving, people are mobile, and they will continue moving. So this is good. And free movement is something that the European got right, and we're not here to reverse it. We like it, we love it. But the goal is to make sure that when someone gets on this 7:42 train in the morning, they are doing it because they choose to, not because the region was not able to keep them and gave them no other option. And at the same time, we need to make sure that the town they left is becoming attractive to someone else who wants to go there and stay there for other reasons. So that is what this is what you will hear today during the sessions, the following sessions of the day. And our goal, our job in MOBI-TWIN was to give the policymakers a sharper map. And your job over the next hours and the next years, of course, is to use it for policy design. I would like to thank you all today.
Well, thank you very much indeed. I think we've had some really interesting opening remarks as well as some great scene setting for some of the challenges that we face, but also a lot of positive discussion to be had, I hope, over the next coming hours. We're going to move on to our first round of scientific presentations. You're going to hear about understanding mobility dynamics. We're going to look at what is happening and why mobility matters and what the data actually shows. So I think we can allow our opening speakers to leave if they wish, and I will introduce you to our scientific speakers. We're going to hear from Ole Jarv, researcher at the Digital Geography Lab at the University of Helsinki, to tell us about integrated data sets and mobility mapping. And then we will also hear from Vicente Boella, full professor of applied economics at the University of Barcelona, to tell us about the drivers of mobility and regional attractiveness. So we're going to hear about cutting-edge mobility mapping, what we're using with those new integrated data sets, and then moving on to the analysis. So, Ole, I'll leave the floor to you first.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the introduction. I think Anastasia just very nicely pointed out the main goal and the findings of the project, and now I will focus more on technical issues. And I will here briefly present you about the integrated dataset that we created and used in the project, and briefly describe the mobility flows that we were able to map between regions across Europe. I led the team that had two main aims, and the first one was to collect, combine, produce, and create one complete integrated MOBI-TWIN dataset in order to examine Europe-wide regional level mobility flows, and even more to do. In general, the dataset comprised of 5 different components, where really the centerpiece was the spatial layer, through which all the other 4 components were linked together. And here in this project, we understood regional level as a NUTS2 spatial unit division. So very briefly, the second component of our data set was a survey data that we carried out during our project by our partner in the consortium. The third component was input data needed for microsimulations in the 5 case study regions that we examined in this project, and in order to make future predictions on human mobility in different regions. The fourth component was data, comprehensive data on regional characteristics that we collected from various data sources. And finally, the fifth component was mobility data that we had to create ourselves, also based on various data sources, and use that in the analysis of mobility flows. So the second aim of our team was really to map those mobility flows by different mobility types and see how these flows take place between regions across Europe. So actually when studying regions, we often think that human mobility is basically about permanent migration of people between regions. But thinking about our really mobile and digital society that we live, it's not only that we move from one place to another, but there are actually many other mobility forms that takes place. We have long-term mobility, we have short-term mobilities, we have even circular mobilities. And in this project, we had 7 different mobility types that we examined. For long-term mobility, we focused on permanent migration, and in addition to that, long-term student mobility. Basically, mobility that takes place more than 1 year. Regarding short-term mobility, we focused on seasonal work mobility and, it's a bit confused here, and then short-term student mobility, which lasted less than a year, basically 1 semester as a common practice. Regarding circular mobility, we had 3 mobility types. We had long-distance commuting that we examined, we had cross-border commuting, and multi-local living, and the mobility that derives from that. What we already knew from the literature, but also from the findings from our project, we saw that regions may be attractive for various mobility types and in different ways. So, meaning that basically if even a region has a decreasing population, it doesn't mean that it's not attractive, because it can be compensated by other mobility types. For example, seasonal work mobility, multi-local living, or even student mobility that brings, at least temporarily, new populations in the region while supporting economy and regional development. So this is something that we should keep in mind. Very briefly about how we created the MOBI-TWIN mobility dataset. We examined a 10-year period from 2012 until 2022. We only focused on intra-Europe mobility, so we excluded mobility coming from outside Europe and going outside. And we examined mobility flows between NUTS2 regions, as I said earlier, and we basically created so-called origin-destination matrix between those NUTS2 regions. And for that we used 3 different data sources. We used labor force survey at micro level, we used Erasmus Plus program data, and geolocated social media data. And in very briefly what we did, we used labor force survey to extract long-distance commuting, seasonal work, and cross-border commuting. From the geolocated social media data, we extracted permanent migration flows and multi-local living mobility. And from Erasmus Plus program, data, we extracted both long-term and short-term student mobility. Regarding the labor force survey and social media data, we used different weightings in order to make regions and countries comparable between each other. And finally, all these 7 different mobility data sets were included in the project's complete data set. What I want to highlight here is that our idea was to make this data set open access, and it will be right after the project finally officially ends, including comprehensive description on metadata and how the data was produced. So now, once the data was created, we now went for mapping the mobility flows between regions across Europe, and here in the set of maps you can see how different is the spatial structure and also the relative distribution of mobility flows between regions in Europe. And here we see the mobility flows for the whole 10-year period. For the analysis, we divided the study period into 3 periods, where we had 2 different periods before COVID, so before 2020, and then the 3rd study period, which was after 2020, in order to understand the impacts of COVID. I have to make a small remark regarding the challenge of using NUTS spatial division units when studying human mobility, because as human mobility is really dependent on spatial distances, then having NUTS spatial units with a really varying geographical sizes can affect what kind of input data for mobility we get. So we were able to mitigate this challenge, but this is something that we need to figure and seek in future research as well. When I now focus on different mobility types, I briefly introduce them. So we start with long-term mobility and focusing on permanent migration. Well, as expected, permanent migration flows really mostly take place within countries, between the regions in a country. And we see that the main destination countries being Germany, France, and Spain, as expected. However, when we compare the changes in spatial structure regarding the COVID pandemic, we saw that to some extent rural regions were kind of benefiting. They were receiving more permanent migration, or at least the out-migration decreased from those regions. And here on the right side map you can see red regions where the regions were kind of having more beneficial time after 2020. So they either lost less people, or then they actually received permanent migration flows. Regarding long-term student mobility, the spatial structure is very different compared to permanent migration, as you can see on the left side. And here we see the top 3 destination countries being Germany, France, and UK, where students actually go for a long-term student exchanges. However, in case of relative terms, the most or the highest receiving ratio of having the incoming students were regions that were located in Netherlands, Germany, and Belgium. And here we also see the COVID-19 having effect on the spatial structure, yet the changes are a bit diverse, and that needs further research to understand those reasons. When we move on to short-term mobility, and here we see the seasonal work mobilities, I recall that I mentioned this challenge of NUTS2 regions, and here we can see very clearly that because of the smaller NUTS2 units in Germany, for example, compared to Finland, where we have really geographically large units, We see that seasonal mobility really takes place in Germany because of the shorter distances between the regions. And then we also see that seasonal work mobility really takes place mostly within country. But it also takes place across countries. And we saw highest mobility from abroad going to Luxembourg, Ireland, and Norway. And here on a map on the right side, you can see the pink regions where we see more incoming seasonal work mobility than going out. In terms of short-term student mobility, again, the spatial structure was somewhat different compared to long-term student mobility. And there, the highest destination countries regarding the absolute numbers of student mobility were Spain, Germany, and France. And in terms of receiving ratio coming from abroad, student mobility coming from abroad, we saw regions in Norway, Sweden, and Ireland having the highest receiving ratios. Obviously here COVID-19 had really big impact, and we saw a decrease of student mobility by 45%, which we know that actually after a few years it rebounded. But for this project we had we had the data only about until 22, so we saw the decrease of mobilities. Finally, about circular mobility, we focused on long-distance commuting, and again, because of the challenge of different NUTS2 units regarding the geographical size, we see here long-distance commuting really focusing on Germany, but also we saw highest numbers within France and Austria as well. But again, mostly those flows are within a country. Finally, we still focused on minor flows on cross-border commuting, which is growing but steadily, and actually that had cross-border commuting had really low effect on COVID. And here we see that the highest receiving ratio in cross-border commuting were countries such as Switzerland, Luxembourg, and Norway. And after mapping the mobility flows, we did analyze what regional factors and in which way they affected mobility flows of different mobility types. But I won't go into detail because the next presentation will focus on those factors more in depth. But overall, I want to say that different regional factors really affect each mobility types differently. So both regarding the sending regions, so what are the characteristics there, but also the receiving regions, what types of regions these are as well. And for example, focusing on factors on economy and labor market or social fabric, they really have different impacts on what types of mobilities are more attractive and which not in different regions. So taking together my presentation now, I have 4 takeaways. So first takeaway is that, surprisingly, to some extent, Europe-wide origin-destination mobility data at NUTS2 level does not exist for various mobility types. And in that sense, MOBI-TWIN project now produced and provides open access dataset to mitigate that knowledge gap. So here you can see QR codes for our MOBI-TWIN dataset. Currently we have the metadata description there, as well as Erasmus student data that we geolocated for mobility analysis. My second takeaway focuses on mapping mobility flows and main regional flows that we found out, and we were able to find and see how COVID-19 affected spatial structures of mobility flows. However, the question now remains whether those changes were short-term or long-term, and that within this project we were not able to examine, but should be examined further for sure. My third takeaway is that different regional characteristics really affect mobility types differently, and because of that, even if some left-behind regions are really losing permanent population, it doesn't mean that it's less attractive, because it might have another mobility flows that could compensate the regional economy and regional development. And here I'm thinking multi-local living in the context of growing remote working arrangements, but also seasonal working and long-distance commuting as well. And finally, I want to emphasize that we need to think beyond permanent migration in order to understand how regions are attractive, and in order to develop various targeted regional policies in the age of twin transition, and in order to make it more or have more attractiveness into those regions as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We will have time for questions, but I will allow Vincenzo to make his presentation. So then we will take all the questions for both presenters together.
Thank you so much. I think we are 1 minute ahead of schedule, so I will take advantage of it just to say how proud I am of MOBI-TWIN. Okay. For me, this is one of the more successful projects I've ever worked. I truly believe that what we have done is scientifically excellent, and we hope it will also have a great policy impact. One of the examples of it is just, my colleague Ole is very humble, but I will have to say that one of these presentations, one of the slides, has recently been accepted at one of the journals of the collection of Nature, and many other scientific publications we hope, are going to be out resulting from this project. So scientifically, we believe that we did, let's say, a nice job. Okay, so this is something I have to say. My colleagues didn't say that, so I do. Okay. So having said that, I will move on. And I will try to explain slightly what about the mobility dynamics. How they went through, this is exactly what Ole explained. And what I will try to say is about what are the factors driving these flows, which is actually regional attractiveness. We have seen disparities growing in Europe in a way which is different from the old cohesion policy. Let's say we are trying to just do several countries to catch up with the European Union. Right now what we see is that disparities are between superstar cities and lagging regions. But why? Why is people, or why are, let's say, production factors going to these places? Well, regional attractiveness, some works, such as OECD and many others, they are focusing on attractiveness from a business point of view. This project is about where people go. And what do people look for? Well, they will look for higher income, finding a job, but not only this. Also finding a sustainable place for living, and also the chance just to be connected. This is actually what MOBI-TWIN tries to identify. How we define attractiveness? Well, this is not our definition. This is actually something we can actually find in many places. Attractiveness is just a multidimensional aspect, and we can actually integrate into the traditional socioeconomic attractiveness two dimensions which matter at the policy level in Europe, which are the digital and the green dimensions. These are the three main pillars of attractiveness considered in the process. What about traditional attractiveness? Well, here we collect many indicators in different dimensions, including, as I said, GDP per capita, jobs, the possibility of finding a job, but also aspects such as institutional quality, criminality, health, housing affordability, and many other fundamentals. This is the map of the regions just for 2020. We also go for the digital pillar, which is characterized by main drivers such as connectivity, the presence of ICT specialists, and the digital skills of the general population, which actually matters as well. And finally, the green dimension is captured by means of variables likely to be impacted by climate policy. The definition here is very close to the green vulnerability coming from Rodriguez Posse and Bartolucci definition, in which, well, as we implement the green transition, several aspects can be damaged, such as reductions in the greenhouse gas emissions, circular economy employment, and actually the presence of sectors potentially to be affected by the green transition, such as agriculture, mining, or even tourism. What is the outcome? The outcome is a general regional attractiveness index. This is the map for 2020. What do we see here? We see, well, northern and western capital regions consistently outperforming southern and eastern non-capital areas across all the dimensions. And this is actually important. This is the first point. Second, there is a large variability between countries, but also within every country. There are internal disparities. Some regions thrive, others remain significantly underdeveloped. These spatial inequalities tend to be more pronounced in countries with lower overall regional attractiveness, such as countries such as Poland, Greece, or Romania. When looking at the geography, we see disparities widening over time, particularly with respect to traditional factors. And what we find, as you can see here, is just rural regions growing, yes, but growing at a lower pace compared to urban areas. And this is actually particularly pronounced for traditional factors. The green factors are, just say, more chaotic, and they were just experiencing an important change during the COVID time. And the digital factors, on the contrary, they are more or less going well, with lagging regions growing at a similar pace compared to leading regions. What about the association with the flows Ole was presenting? Well, overall, what we see is that correlations are positive, as we can expect. And the more important factor are the traditional attractiveness. But interestingly, there are other dimensions, such as the digital one, which is the main driving factor for flows such as students' mobility. On the contrary, the green dimension matters, but matters less. And for permanent mobility, the correlation is quite low. This is something one could figure out what is going on, but I will show you in a minute something which is trying to be compensating this result. In any case, what we find is that there are, as Ole was saying, multiplicity of factors affecting multiple types of flows. So you can bet on different targets. This has been validated in this very, very recently. I mean, it was published just in April, and this is about, so you can find all the details, and this has some impact as well on the media. Based on this, we have built a typology of regions by different techniques. Considering clustering analysis, we summarized Europe into 6 groups, 6 clusters. Let's briefly have a look at them. First cluster, we call it metropolitan leaders. They are the superstar cities, innovation-rich, digitally elite, but struggling to find affordable housing and livable conditions for the residents. Well, we know this is the penalty we have to pay for being a star. You have congestion, you have many aspects that need to be solved. Cluster 2 is labeled as balanced innovators. This is our EU steady hands regions with great infrastructures and services, high quality of life, but they must work harder to stay relevant and to keep active, just retaining talent and technology. Cluster 3, industrial heartlands in transformation, heavy lifters of the EU. Stable, hardworking, but in race against time to digitalize and go green before models become obsolete. Cluster 4, economies in structural transition. They are moderately attractive regions, improving both digital and green, offering competitive living conditions, but at some point constrained by relatively weak institutional and relying on traditional sectors. And finally, the two clusters, the clusters with higher potential because they are lagging behind. One group is the cluster 5, which is this made up of young, affordable regions, which are growing fast in green and digital, but and with a strong potential to catch up. But of course, they also face institutional weaknesses. And finally, structurally lagging and peripheral regions, low attractiveness, but strong potential, particularly if they actually activate environmental assets and to stop the demographic decline. What is the outcome, or where is the connection of these clusters with mobility? Well, in the scalar plots below, every type of graph is just representing one type of flow. Every color represents every type of clusters, and clearly there is a connection with some type of flows stronger than others for every type of cluster. But the table is actually very clear in what is the demographic evolution of every cluster. Clusters 1 and 2 are the ones gaining population. On the contrary, regions in clusters 5 and 6 are the ones declining, strongly declining, I would say. There is a strong link then between structural disadvantage and outmigration, and the impact of mobility, of attractiveness, is something we need to take into consideration. All these elements, the attractiveness, are displayed at a couple of dashboards which you can access. There are the QRs there. One is just presenting, you can click one region, you can see the evolution, you can see the comparison against the country, and you can see the position in every type of index. The same applies for typologies, just presenting the evolution and just the picture, the distribution of every cluster and every region within the cluster in the dimensions, in the considered dimensions. This is actually aggregate data at the aggregate level. Within MOBI-TWIN, we also conducted a massive survey which we used to analyze which are the specific drivers of mobility. We can look at actual mobility and also intentions of mobility. And this is something really, really interesting. Actually, the green preferences are a primary driver of mobility, migration, intentions. So what do people say and what do people do? Well, right now, what we see is that what people do is not very actually connected with green. But what they say is that it matters. So it's not unlikely to see in the very near future the green dimension to be one of the main drivers of mobility. What about digital preferences? Well, internet, we can actually be connected almost everywhere very easily. But what is interesting is the fact that digital connectors act as anchors for regions. If you are well connected in your region and you take the train that Anastasia was saying, well, maybe they are not going away. They will stay. You need to be actually having the possibilities, the capabilities, just to be working in your region. In any case, we also find huge heterogeneity. Higher educated individuals and masters showed increased sensitivity for these transition factors. By the way, we also conducted a small chapter, it's not a small, but it's a full chapter, related to minorities and ethnic minorities, gender minorities, etc., and what are the drivers of mobility for these groups too, which I think it also matters. We conducted a couple of case studies, one for Erasmus students, with the data set collected, and just we have the pinpointed where is every student coming from and going to. Several million students over many years. One of the more interesting things we find is that, well, yeah, students are responsive to attractiveness, etc. But it's super interesting to find that students are actually going to places where, well, this general attractiveness, GDP per capita, maybe is not that important. Housing affordability. If you plan to travel to Barcelona, where I am, and try to find a rent, it's insane. And this happens in many other places in Europe. Well, what we find is that the net flows to not that good regions are actually positive. Well, if you're not such a good region according to your position in the clusters, well, this is a place where you can target. You can try to attract students to your region. Housing affordability, high quality education, this is something you can invest. And other aspects we also developed our case studies is a blind policy. We developed just the analysis of a language policy in a region in Spain in which, well, with the almost unanimity of the parliament in the region, there was a policy developed just to protect the local language. So almost everyone in the parliament voted in favor of this policy. There was a caveat, though. The rest of the country saw this as a barrier. So we see that in the year after, just exactly after just the installation of this policy, the incoming inflows for the rest of the country declined. So any type of spatially blind policy that you want to implement, which can be good, this is great, but there can be caveats. There can be unintended consequences. So additional policies need to support non-desired effects of just for mobility. And I finish. Policy priorities, place-based strategies targeted for regions. Every region can actually look at similar regions within Europe. I mean, the cluster typology actually provides us just a good place to look at. So where are doing other regions similar to mine? Activated growing potential, which is actually going to be a major driver of flows in the near future. We believe that. Mobility as resilience. We use mobility and digital connectivity to strengthen human capital, reduce regional decline, and to anchor our people. And finally, align funding with regional reality. The next budget, European budget, should be, and this is not something coming only from me, this is coming from many voices, have also some spatial dimension. I am in the Committee of the Regions. This is something everyone will agree with me, but it's not just because I'm here, it's just because we believe that. And that's all for me today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, it's all for you if there's no questions, but I'm hoping that there will be some questions here from the floor. Who would like to start the bidding on questions, either for Ole or Vincenzo? Yes.
Yes. Thank you. A really interesting project. I had a question about the green attractiveness angle. I wondered if you also looked at the actual impact of climate change. So, for example, flooding, droughts, heat, that kind of thing. Or if not, how do you think that would affect mobility? Or maybe both of you.
Yeah. Well, actually, we did not have a look. If you think about it, the green transition, in my view, is not about that. It's about changing things to make the climate change not to be that hard. Having said that, because this actually were our reality, we are actually in a parallel investigations. We're actually investigating what is the impact of climate change in different dimensions. And the impact is going to be dramatic. One of the examples we are analyzing with a different type of flows is tourism. And this will completely change the nature in which we see flows. Flying to Seville in July or in August, I mean, I don't recommend it, honestly. You can go in spring, it's great, but not in July. I mean, people in GRC, in Seville, they know that. And this is going to be affecting not only one specific sector, but many others, and also potentially coming from floods and many other catastrophes.
Thank you for that. Who else? Any questions or anything you'd like to hear from Sandra?
Yes, thank you very much. Very interesting. So my name is Sandra Jolk. I'm from the OECD. I'm naturally interested in policy recommendations. I was wondering on cross-border mobility, you gave us some absolute numbers, but did you also look at what are the characteristics of regions that make cross-border mobility particularly successful, given that we have so many regions in Europe that have a border with other regions from other countries? I mean, I'm only looking at Germany, my own country, has so many borders. Did you also look at what incentivizes this mobility, and is it particularly students, or what groups of people do move and why, and what kind of policy recommendations emerge from that? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Indeed, cross-border commuting, but also cross-border mobility more general in Europe is a growing and very interesting topic that is actually under radar, because we have no information about it except cross-border commuting, according to labor force surveys and some statistics in some countries. Coming to your question, I think we didn't look that much into specifically what are the factors there. I don't know if Vicente recalls any factors that might have impact on cross-border commuting, but obviously from another project I can say that GDP certainly plays a role, that commuting goes to those regions that are more developed, but also language barrier is one very clear factor that shapes like how people cross borders, even though there might be some, let's say, economic incentives even higher than or there is a potential, but because of language barriers or other border obstacles, there might not be actually realized that potential. But I don't know if Vicente, do you recall by heart?
Thank you. More questions, or anyone else wants to add something? Yeah, right at the back.
Thank you very much for your presentations. I find this project remarkable. But I have a question. Based on your cluster analysis, I would say that agglomeration economies are still at play. So when further down I read that mobility is a means for resilience, I was kind of puzzled because it reminded me of what Paul Krugman said many years ago, that be careful of suggesting to take down barriers because this may not lead to dispersion and convergence. It might actually lead to concentration and further divergence. So what is your take on this? Thank you very much.
Yeah, this is actually the outcome, and just what we see, and the many reports from the World Bank, for instance, just insist on this. If you have growth coming from cities, if cities are actually the main engine for growth, so let cities grow. They will be the engine for growth in Europe. And this is great. This is actually what we're seeing these days. But at the same time, what we see is that a big portion of economic growth in Europe is not coming only from big cities. We also see that there are many territories which are actually drivers of innovations. Many big innovations are not coming from major cities. Major cities are also one of the main drivers of inequality. And finally, if you see in a country that the winner takes all, what you have is just a revenge, discontent from many other places, driving to different aspects which are not economic, and they also matter. So from the growth point of view, there are also many chances in which you can actually drive growth without focusing only in big cities and in rich regions. This is one point. And the second point is just from a just and fair transition or just and fair economic growth, we also need to look at different aspects, not only economic growth. It was very nice to listen to Thomas Wobben and also just to Simone a few minutes ago. I mean, I really like the phrase of the name of the Directorate General, which is a fair, green and digital transition. Well, if it needs to be fair, we also need to look at other dimensions, not just growth. So I fully agree with you. This is the reality, but we have policies at our hand just to not just break economic growth, but to foster other sources of economic growth, which is also very powerful. Thank you. I hope I answered.
Yes, quite popularly, apparently. Very well done. Any other questions, comments? Yeah, Maria.
Second question from me. I wondered if you also looked at international sort of immigration. I wasn't quite clear to me if it was just internal or if you also looked at international inflows.
Yes, we basically excluded international flows, so coming from outside Europe or going outside. So we've mostly we focused on the Europe, like mobility within Europe.
Okay, I'm getting the sense that we've exhausted this for now. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, but I think that's fine. We'll give ourselves an extra 10 minutes on the coffee break. And of course, feel free to grab our speakers during that bilaterally if you want to find out a bit more about their work. And we will resume at 12 o'clock with our first panel debate, From Evidence to Policy Intelligence, What Do Mobility Trends Mean for Regions? So we'll have a 1-hour panel debate coming up at 12 o'clock. Those of you joining us online, please make sure you're back for that as well.